The Apology and the Crito represent a tension. They represent even a conflict between two more or less permanent and irreconcilable moral codes. The one represented by Socrates regards reason, that is to say, the sovereign reason of the individual, as the highest possible authority. It is the philosopher's reliance on his own reason that frees him from the dangerous authority of the state and safeguards the individual from complicity in the injustice and evils that seem to be a necessary part of political life. Here is Socrates, the principled abstainer. But the other moral code is represented by the speech of the laws, where it is the laws of the community, its oldest and deepest beliefs and institutions, its constitution, its regime, as we would say, its politeia, that are fundamentally obligatory on the individual and even take priority over the individual. The one point of view takes the philosophic life, the examined life, to be the one most worth living. The other takes the political life, the life of the citizen engaged in the business of deliberating, legislating, making war and peace as the highest calling for a human being. These constitute two irreconcilable alternatives, two different callings, so to speak. And any attempt, I think, to reconcile or to synthesize these two can only lead to a deep injustice to each. Plato seems to believe that each of us must choose somehow, must choose between one or the other of these two contenders for the most serious and worthwhile way of life. Which do we take? Which is the matter of ultimate concern or care for us? Which? But we cannot have both. And I think that distinction, to some degree, captures the differences set out when I asked at the beginning of the class about who believes Socrates is innocent and should be acquitted and who believes he is guilty and should be condemned, between a philosophical and a political point of view. And in a sense, one could say, maybe this is not Plato's last word. I mean, why does Socrates choose to stay and drink the hemlock? After all, if he is committed fundamentally to the principles of his own reason, still, why should he care that much about the laws of the city? Why not let Crito help him escape and go to Crete, where he can drink the good wine of Crete and enjoy his old age? And in fact, Plato wrote another dialogue, his largest dialogue, a book called The Laws, where you see a man simply designated as the Athenian stranger living in Crete and carrying on a conversation with representatives of that society. And that might be Socrates, that might be, although he is not identified as Socrates, it is sometimes thought here is the kind of speech or discussion Socrates would be having had he escaped. But that gets back to the question, are the reasons Socrates gives Crito for refusing to escape, the reasons he puts in the mouth of the laws of the city of Athens, are those Socrates' true reasons? Does Socrates believe that speech that he constructs between himself and the laws? Or is it simply a fiction that he creates for the sake of relieving his friend of the guilt he evidently feels for being unable to help Socrates? Crito is, of course, very concerned with what people will think of him if it becomes known that he has somehow not helped Socrates to escape. Is that speech for the law with the laws really intended for the benefit of Crito? Rather than an expression of Socrates' deepest opinions about the questions of obligation and obedience? Is he, in that speech, bestowing, as it were, a kind of justice to Crito, to reconcile him to the laws of the city and to give him reasons, you might say rational considerations for continued obedience to the law. In many ways, that would seem to make a certain sense of the apparent discrepancy between these two dialogues. It demonstrates not only Socrates' sense of his superiority to the laws of Athens. In the first dialogue, in the first speech, in the apology, he defies the city to put him to death by expressing indifference to death. And then in the Crito, he very much expresses that indifference to death by refusing to allow Crito to let him escape. Socrates seems to remain, even until the end, very much a kind of law unto himself, while at the same time, again, providing Crito and others like him an example of rational and dignified obedience to the law. When we look at the death of Socrates, do we think of it as a tragedy, as a moral tragedy? And a just man sentenced to death by an unjust law? I don't think so. Far from it. Socrates' death at the age of 70 was intended by him as an act of philosophical martyrdom that would allow future philosophy to be favorably recognized as a source of courage and justice. In one of his later letters, Plato refers to his depiction of Socrates as he says his attempt to render Socrates young and beautiful. That is, he consciously set out to beautify Socrates, presenting a man fearless before death, refusing to participate in any act of injustice, while dispensing wisdom and justice to those who will listen. We don't know the real Socrates. All we know of Socrates is what we read in Plato and Aristophanes and a small number of others who have sketched various different pictures of him. But Plato's Socrates is necessarily poles apart from Aristophanes' Socrates' depiction of him as a sort of sophist who makes the weaker argument the stronger. Plato's dialogues, the Apology, as well as the Republic and the Crito, are in the broadest sense of the term an attempt not only to answer the charge against Aristophanes, but also defend the cause of philosophy as something of value and merit. Where does that leave us today? What are we to make of all this? We who live in a very different kind of world from that of 4th century Athens. What can we learn from the example of Socrates? Most of us, like most of you earlier, find ourselves instinctively taking the side of Socrates against the city of Athens. Those who might defend the city of Athens against Socrates, those who believe in the value of civic piety, are very few among us. Perhaps only those of you who might come from a small town in the South or from certain areas of Brooklyn would understand something about the supreme value of piety as a way of life. We, by and large, tend to accept the picture of Socrates as a victim of injustice. We conveniently overlook a number of facts about him. His hostility to democracy. We'll see that in the Republic, but we've seen it already to some degree in the Apology. His claim that the lives of his fellow citizens are not worth living. And his claim that his way of life has been commanded by a God that no one else has ever heard or seen. None of these seem to make any difference to us, and yet I think they should. Given Socrates' claims, ask yourself, what would a responsible body of citizens have done? How should they have acted? One answer might be to extend greater toleration to civil dissidents like Socrates, individuals of heterodox belief, but whose own views may stimulate others to question and think for themselves, all to the good. Milton, John Locke, People like Voltaire argued something like this. But is that to do justice to Socrates? The one thing that Plato does not argue is that Socrates should simply be tolerated. To tolerate his teaching would seem to trivialize it in some sense, to render it harmless. The Athenians at least pay Socrates the tribute of taking him seriously, which is exactly why he is on trial. The Athenians refuse to tolerate Socrates because they know he is not harmless, that he poses a challenge, a fundamental challenge to their way of life and all that they hold to be noble and worthwhile. Socrates is not harmless because of his own professed ability to attract followers, a few today, a few more tomorrow, who knows. To tolerate Socrates would be to say to him that we care little for our way of life and that we are willing to let you challenge it and impugn it every day. Is that good? Is that right? The trial of Socrates asks us to think about the limits of toleration. What views, if any, do we find simply intolerable? Is a healthy society one that is literally open to every point of view? Freedom of speech is naturally a cherished good. Is it the supreme good? Should it trump all other goods? Or does toleration reach a point when it ceases to be toleration and becomes, in fact, a kind of soft nihilism that can extend liberty to everything precisely because it takes nothing very seriously? And by nihilism, I mean the view that every preference, however squalid, base, or sordid, must be regarded as the legitimate equal of every other. Is this really tolerance, or is it rather a form of moral decay that has simply decided to abandon the search for truth and standards of judgment? There's a danger, I think, that endless tolerance leads to intellectual passivity and the kind of uncritical acceptance of all points of view. Well, so much for that. What I want to do, see we're running out of time, is if you could think about it, maybe hold that thought in your mind once in a while between now and Wednesday. And on Wednesday we will begin reading what is arguably, some people believe, the most important book ever written, Plato's Republic. See you on Wednesday.